I think labels can be empowering if you use the label to be in control of it. Where labels they can really, I'll say, be disempowering if the label controls you.
It's almost like everything matters so much and nothing matters at all simultaneously. Is this just a Facebook message? Is this just an Upwork conversation? Is this just a WhatsApp message? Is this just one panic attack? Or is this something that's going to help me grow and have an upward trajectory forever?
Next Level Nation, welcome back to another episode of Next Level University, where we help you level up your life, your love, your health, and your wealth. Excuse me. We hope you enjoyed yesterday's episode number 1641, Do You Love Yourself? A very deep episode, and I enjoyed that one very, very, very much. Today, for episode number 1642, Freestyle Friday, here's my thought. I had a thought the other day. I will preface it. This is I told Alan, sometimes I have things I call THC thoughts. Took an edible the other night. Okay? I like a good edible from time to time. And Taryn and I were watching TV. And I was starting to get a little anxious. I didn't know if it was from the edible or from what. And this is going to sound super weird. So I just want to preface it with that.
Who's excited?
I had this moment where I thought to myself, I literally said, Kev, you're not, in your mind, you are the type of person that gets anxious. Therefore, anytime you feel something, you convince yourself you're getting anxious, and then you get anxious. And I had this very simple dialogue with myself of, you're fine. You're fine. This is all made up in your head. You are totally fine. 3 seconds later, it felt perfect. Again, I'm not saying that is the recipe for everything. I'm not saying that's a medical diagnosis that's going to fix things. I don't mean that. But what I mean is, if you identify as shy, I've done this many, many, many times. If you identify as shy, you get out of your comfort zone and you go do something that somebody who identifies as shy might not do. You get to that place and then you end up sitting in the corner, not engaging with people because you're so uncomfortable. Then that reformulates the fact in your brain that I'm shy. I'm just going to sit over here. Let me just get this over with. And that it continues to perpetuate the problem. Really what this is it's the identity level. It's really not the identity level. It's the identity. What do you identify as? Then if you looked at all the patterns and if you looked at all the proof, I mean, think about it. I would probably identify as, I'm somebody who gets super anxious sometimes. I'm not saying that's not true, and I'm not saying that if you convince yourself you're not, it's gonna get rid of it. I'm not saying that. But I do think there's times where we say we are something, and then we start doing things that reinforce what the thing is that we are, and then our behavior shifts, and then our identity becomes that, and then eventually it just becomes normal for us to be that. So that THC thought, for lack of better phrasing, it was very strange, Alan, because I literally had a talk with myself, and I said, the only reason you feel like you're getting anxious is because you always say that you're the person who gets anxious when they take edibles. That's the only reason this is happening. This is totally fine. This is not a problem. You're going to be fine. And I was fine instantly. I don't know if it was just because I don't know. It was very strange for me. It was very strange for me because I felt like I was talking to myself at a really deep level, and it just made sense. That's what I want to get started with Freestyle Friday.
Well, the thing that came up for me is a question, which is, can you behave inconsistent with your identity?
You're asking me?
I knew that was going to happen.
I just told you I don't have almost any answers, and you're asking me a question? I
knew that was going to happen. I knew you were going to think, because a lot of times I'll start a dialogue with a question and then answer it. That Kev was just expecting to have some time off the mic for a minute there.
I'm ready. I'm ready to roll.
No, I was asking you, yes.
I think you can in moments, and I think eventually those moments can add up to a more significant amount of time. But it's almost like I think that's where courage comes in. If you identify as someone who is shy, it's just, okay, what is something that somebody who is shy wouldn't normally do? And let me just take a step in that direction. I identified for a long time as somebody who is shy. I went to the venue that we're hosting Next Level Live at today, and I was like the most outgoing person ever, walking up to the front desk, talking to Kyle, the what is he, the facilities manager there. It was something that I never would have done 10 years ago. It wouldn't have been like that. It wouldn't have been. But it was just,
What would have been different?
I probably would have been quiet, and I probably would not have wanted to start conversations, and I probably would have been more mousy, for lack of better phrasing. But I think that's the important thing, is you can't change your identity overnight. It doesn't work that way. And you almost, I said this to somebody the other day. What did I say? Oh, I said this on group coaching. We have a client who just crossed his 100th episode with his podcast. And I said, you know what's interesting? If somebody went through your podcast and listened to episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to episode 100, they would notice zero difference in you. But if they started episode 1 and they jumped to episode 100, they're going to say, wow, you really sucked at the beginning. Or you're so much better than you were now. I think fear chasing, I think identity work, I think confidence, I think boundaries, all of that stuff is like that because you can't go from 0 to 10 overnight. It's just not realistic. It's just not realistic to do that. And even in this example, my funny story, that's not something I would have been capable of doing 5 years ago. Because I've gone through so many different bouts of what I would probably consider pressure-based anxiety. I don't know if that's a real thing or a diagnosis, whatever. I'm not saying that from a medical place. But one of the reasons...
In the past, you would have had me come with you?
Probably. Yeah, probably. I didn't even think of that. It's like, yeah, this is going to be fun. I was super excited. I was excited as hell to go today. Just as an anchor point, I was having panic attacks when Alan and I were traveling back in 2018, I think. When we got back from Arizona, that was the first time. So I had my first panic attack before we went to Florida. I had another panic attack in Florida, if not multiple panic attacks. Then we flew out to Arizona, and I remember that Dr. Jen Esker was there. We had her on the podcast a couple times. That's where we were first introduced to her. And she was doing breath work stuff from the stage, and I literally couldn't do the breath work stuff because I was so afraid I was going to have a panic attack. We got home. I stayed in bed pretty much nonstop for like 2 weeks.
Yeah, that was brutal.
That was
Recovery.
brutal.
Yeah.
It was brutal. I thought I was sick. I didn't know what was going on. I thought maybe I caught something. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. It was to the point where I had to teach myself how to walk on the treadmill again because when I first started, I thought I was going to have a panic attack. And I had to teach myself how to, when I say teach myself, I had to work through that. I couldn't box. It took me like a year to get back, maybe not a year, but probably 6 months to get back into boxing because I was so anxious. I was so nervous. I couldn't catch my breath. I'm going to have another panic attack. So I definitely identify as someone who deals with anxiety. It's helped me at times to just say, Kev, this is in your head. Now, again, I'm not saying that's going to work for everyone. I'm not saying, hey, snap your fingers, it's going to go away. I'm not saying that. But the awareness of it for me has always been very important. And then I just try to talk to myself. Like, Kev, you're fine. You're okay. This has happened before. You're fine. It's always been fine. You're fine. Easier said than done in the moment. But that's been my experience. It was bad. It was really, really bad 5 years ago. It was terrible. Like, I couldn't get out of bed for weeks at a time.
This is the danger of labels, but it's almost like every time you label yourself as something, it empowers you and disempowers you simultaneously. I'll explain. So when you started to realize that you struggle with anxiety and you started to identify as someone who struggles with anxiety, I think there's a component of that, of acceptance of, okay, I now am, hey, my name's Kevin and I struggle with anxiety type of thing. That admittance factor now allows you to actually work on it.
Yeah.
But eventually that becomes a ceiling where now that becomes why you're anxious.
It's
so
weird.
It's so interesting. And I think that happens with every label. I'm a podcaster. Okay, well, does that mean you don't speak? Does that mean you always have to be the one talking? There's all these things that come with it.
Yeah.
And I think that it's important to understand what comes with these labels. I wanted to share something as well because something came up for me while you were talking, which was you don't understand how big of a difference these things are and how big these things compound into your future. So something came up for me earlier that I thought was really powerful where we were talking about how, I think you mentioned this on another episode, where Ron had an NLU birthday. So she's been with us for 4 years. I don't know if you mentioned it on the podcast or behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So one of our team members, Ron, has been with NLU for 4 years. And NLU is 7 years old. So we started in March of 2017, the Hyperconscious podcast, and now it's March of 2024. So Ron, you had a conversation on Upwork with her 4 years ago.
Yep.
And now she runs the entire production team, and it's just been unbelievable. And we have a group in WhatsApp called Out Here Jeffin', and it's where we all just share playful, funny stuff. And Ron had mentioned that she's happy 4 years. Quick share before heading to bed, and since we are a day early here, I turned 4 years in NLPS. NLPS is Next Level Podcast Solutions on the 11th. And she said she saw the Upwork convo. And I said today, happy NLU birthday, Ron, 4 years old and just getting started. So grateful to have you with us. Who knew that one Upwork conversation would change all of our lives so massively? How different is your life from that one conversation? How different is Ron's life from that one conversation? How different is NLU because of that one conversation? And the question becomes, and this is kind of what I wanted to talk about a little bit on Freestyle Friday, which is you don't really know how big of a deal something's going to be when it's happening. Mm. And how many other conversations have you had on Upwork that ended up being nothing? So it's almost like you have to treat every conversation like it could be the conversation. And that can be it's almost like everything matters so much and nothing matters at all simultaneously. Is this just a Facebook message? Is this just an Upwork conversation? Is this just a WhatsApp message? Is this just one panic attack? Or is this something that's going to help me grow and have an upward trajectory forever?
Yeah. And
I think that that's kind of the philosophical discussion here, which is how do you know how much effort to put into any given thing? And how do you know when to, that's not a big deal, you know?
Next Level Nation, what is happening? If you've thought to yourself, I want to try coaching, but you don't really know where to start, group coaching would be a wonderful place for you. That's really why we created it in the first place. We start a new round every 90 days. So if you're hearing this, go to the website, nextleveluniverse.com, and we have the landing page where you can actually hold your spot right now. Even if there's a group going on right now, you can still lock your spot for the next one. The biggest thing that we've seen is as we get closer and closer to the date, unfortunately, some people end up missing. The group fills up and they can't do it, and then they end up regretting that. So please head over to the website. The link will be in the show notes, and we would love to see you there. It's hard because there's a part of me, I was thinking of this the other day. I was thinking if let's say I have anxiety forever. Let's just say I have anxiety for the rest of my life in some way, shape, or form. Would I ever go back and change that? Because it came from this. It came from the journey. It did. I never had it really before to that degree. I think it just came from being under so much pressure and so much stress and with so much uncertainty and just riding the struggle bus. And the answer was, well, no, I would never change that because how many amazing things have come from this too? That was part one. And then the second part of it is there's almost a piece of me that wishes I never knew it was anxiety. A very small piece, right? Because then would I get anxious? I don't know. I have no idea. If I didn't know what it was,
You get anxious, and then you get anxious about being anxious.
that's how it
and then
works.
It gets worse.
That's how anxiety works. And trigger warning for anybody who listens or who's listening who deals with heavy anxiety, because you obviously know. I'm blessed where it's not terrible. I know there's a lot of people that struggle to just get out of bed in the morning. I'm not there. I'm very blessed. And I've worked a lot on it just in my own head. I've worked very diligently over the last however many years. But there is a piece of me that, yeah, I at some times I wish I didn't even know what it was, because I wonder if it would affect me as much. But I think it would be worse, because I would be in my head of what's this thing going on. I think labels can be empowering if you use the label to be in control of it. Where labels they can really, I'll say, be disempowering if the label controls you, unfortunately. But I don't know. That's a deeper conversation. Maybe there's some labels that you can only have so much control over. I don't really know. It's a deep conversation.
Well, the next question becomes, everything's in a spectrum too. So you have anxiety at what, 0 to 10?
It depends. It depends on, it gets worse when I travel. It depends. It depends on a lot of things. On day-to-day life, when things are just going, 75% of the time, level 1, I would say. Yeah.
Depending on which edible you ate that day.
That is, yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah, you go too much, and
because I get anxiety when I smoked with you that one time. I got tons of anxiety. That was terrible.
Yeah, that was a fun time for me. Not really. It was. There's nothing worse than helping someone through anxiety when they get high on weed.
Not good. Well, the question, and you told me I don't struggle with anxiety, and I think that's probably true statistically speaking, but it doesn't mean I'm never anxious. I get stressed out, and I jokingly say I've been cracking like a walnut lately.
But I don't know if you know
the pressure.
I don't know if you know what anxiety is.
It's all relative.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's like. Emilia, she was like, "No, I'm insecure." It's like, sweetheart.
Right,
no,
right. Compared to what?
Compared to what? Exactly. And someone who really struggles with insecurity at level 10 would feel unseen and misunderstood by her saying, "No, it's manufactured empathy," is what I call that.
Well,
I've been working really hard not to have manufactured empathy, because I struggle with self-doubt sometimes, but it's so minimal compared to the norm that I sometimes feel like people think I'm manufacturing empathy.
I would trade my self-belief in for yours, and I would trade my anxiety for yours any day of the week. Now, but that's on my end.
How do you know? This is actually me just being curious.
I don't.
I genuinely want to know.
I don't.
Because I don't know what it's like to be you. But
it's pretty weird. It's pretty weird.
How that would be so weird.
I know.
If I could be you for a day and you could.
You might not come back. You might not go back.
You know what would be funny? Can you imagine if you could? What was that silly movie where they changed places?
There's been many. Freaky Friday was one. There's been many.
There was another funny one. Ryan Reynolds and
Change Up.
Yeah. The thing is, though, is when they change places, they're still them. They're just so they don't feel each other's anxiety. They just change lives, circumstances. Yeah. But I wonder what that would be like to operate from your mind for a day. I wonder how much more I would understand you.
Oh,
that would be so fascinating.
Probably a ton.
Yeah.
It would be strange. The answer is I don't know. Just from what I've seen, it's like most of the stuff I'm worried about, you're not. It's kind of that. And then most of the stuff I'm not worried about, you are. Imagine that. I'm not worried about people liking me necessarily. Usually people usually get along with me pretty well. That's usually kind of how it works. But if I'm in a room with a bunch of people who are really smart, I don't think they're going to think I'm smart. I don't think we're going to have that level of conversation. I'll probably try to make them laugh, but I'm not going to fit in because I'm smart like you. That's my experience. So maybe that's a deeper part of this episode is, you might want to trade lives with someone, but just understand if you were to trade lives with someone, you might also lose some of the most important things that you love about yourself. You might lose those. Those might go. You might not get those. Because I know comparison even that, it's like, how do you know? I don't. But if I was thinking from a place of comparison, I think you're definitely more confident than I am in certain things, but probably most things.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say you probably have less mental health struggles than I do. But also, maybe that's because you've worked on them longer. There's so many things that are underneath it.
I was in the kitchen with Emilia the other day, and she's 5'3", and I forget what we were doing. We were making slop. We call it slop. It's basically just soup with leftovers in it.
Sounds wonderful.
Yeah, it's bomb. And we put raviolis. It's actually good. But we're actually having it tonight. We have this stove that's underneath the microwave's above the stove, and there's this little. So I'm 6'2", and she uses the back burner, which is hard for me because I can't even see the food because the microwave's in the way of it, kind of. And I'm like, why are you using the back burner? Use the front one. And she's like, what do you mean? I said, I can't even get at it. I can't see it, you know? And she's like, oh, come down to my level. And I was like, she's like, yeah, it's kind of nice, right? It's like a little nook. I was like, oh my goodness, this is what you see? This is wild. I've never been, you know. And she's cute in the closet. She'll ask me to come in and grab something from the top shelf. And she has a little step stool, which is cute. But just something as simple as that, it's very hard to understand what someone else's experience is because you're a different height. You're a different cultural background. You have different belief systems. You have different core values. You have different eyesight. One of your eyes doesn't work.
That's correct.
I have no idea what that's like.
I don't know what it's like for it not to be that way.
I know.
That's the thing. Real quick, when I was in middle school, I think, I don't know why this had never gotten fleshed out before. I don't know if I just had never gone to the eye doctors. I have no idea. But I went to the eye doctors, and they said, Kev is probably pretty bad in school, right? And my mom said, no, he's A's and B's. And they said, there's no way he's good at sports, though, right? And she said, no, he's good at everything. He's good at everything he ever does. And they're like, we have no idea how because he's like blind in one of his eyes. And then I got glasses. But I still, right now, I wear glasses occasionally. Like I have glasses now. I forget about them. I've been this way for 34 years. You think I don't care? I'm used to it.
I don't like seeing blurry.
That's all there's no such thing as blurry when you've never seen clear.
Yeah. When I first got glasses, I remember I could see the leaves on the trees. That was I was driving home from the eye doctors, and I remember being like, oh, the leaves on the trees, there's like distinctions in this. And I remember thinking, yeah, this is what it's like to really see. But again, what's the lesson in all that? It's try your best to see things from other people's perspective, kind of knowing you can't. This has been really hard for me lately, but I've become much more mature, I think, in the last few years. I don't really understand fully what it's like to not believe things are possible for me. There are certain things, like, for sure, I don't think I can be a strongman competition. For some reason, being strong is really hard for me. I mean, it's obnoxious how weak I am. Emilia's super strong. She's, like, really strong. It's wild. But certain things just come really easy, and certain things don't. And I think that's true for all of us, depending on what extent. And then the question becomes, like, who's gifted? And then this whole idea of being gifted. We all know who's gifted, quote unquote, and who's not. And all of us are gifted in certain things.
No.
But in what things and how many? And what are you gifted at? You might not even know that that's a gift because you might just think nothing of it. Self-belief, I had no clue. It's the reverse engineering finish lines thing, no idea. And so now it's become very evident. Oh, when you can just figure out what the recipe is, you just believe so much more in the potential of the future. We have, I talked to Emilia about this. We have clients together. That's taught me so much because she'll come up with stuff that I never would have come up with. I never would have thought of that. And then there's other things that are so simple for me that it's like, we should consult with each other before we send a message because that's not going to land. They don't know what you're talking about. And so I had someone say this to me earlier, actually today, I asked the client, and there was a purpose for this too, rather than just trying to figure out who he liked better on the show, but he's been listening to the podcast for a long time. I said, who do you resonate more with on the podcast? Because he's starting a YouTube channel, and I wanted to teach him the different ways to communicate effectively. And he said, you, me, meaning me, not Kev. And I said, why? He said, you're more direct. You think similarly to me. And there was one more. I think he said I was more honest. And he's very hardcore. So when he says honest, he means just being direct about how brutal life is. And most people, I think, would pick you.
It depends on the person.
I think the large majority of our listeners would pick you. Now, here's the cool part about this show. You get both. You get both, and you're going to learn things you never would have from one of us. So I think that's really quite awesome. But the point of all this is, what if I don't know what I don't know? Kevin doesn't know what Kevin doesn't know. Kevin doesn't know what Kevin's great at. I don't know what I'm great at. And then every listener, we all are looking from our own frame. The last thing I'll share about this, I will never forget, I was listening to an audio program way back in the day. This is like 8 years ago, when I first started getting into personal growth. And they use this analogy of, imagine there's a camera at a party, and it's a huge rager. And a fight broke out. I've talked to you about this on the Hyperconscious podcast way back in the day. A fight breaks out, but the camera never sees it. Now imagine that same party, but the camera was only ever in the room where the fight broke out. The viewer, the person watching this film or whatever, this home movie, they would have no idea. Part one would, it was a great party. Everyone had a blast. It was awesome. And person two would say, that was the worst party ever. A huge fight broke out. Same party, two completely different perspectives and opinions and understandings of the same party. And so what does this all come down to is, how do you keep a wide lens of understanding? I think that's what this podcast has done for us, because we've interviewed so many people, we've talked to each other, we've coached so many different people from all these different backgrounds. And the cool part about that is that you see all these different perspectives, and then you figure out what patterns, are common. And everything's a spectrum. I didn't know I didn't deal with anxiety until I coached people who do.
I know. I think that's the way it has to be.
Yeah, and the problem is, Kev, is people that aren't in this industry, that aren't coaching, all these people, they don't know that it's not just them. Yeah. And I think that that's been the surprising benefit of being in this space and what we do for work. You just have such a wider perspective, because most people don't have a career built on going deep with hundreds, if not thousands of people at this point, where you just get so many different data points on the spectrum. So it's almost like we can see the whole spectrum now, and we can see where we were ignorant. And if you were to go back to episode 40, like you listened to recently, you sound ignorant to you only because you're not now.
Yes.
And I could tell when I go back.
I could tell based on the advice that I was giving that I didn't really know what I was saying.
Right.
I only had one.
Know the implications of what you were saying from all the different perspectives.
I had one flavor. My flavor is, if you're like me, this is what's going to work for you. And I think that's where everybody starts.
10% of you. Yeah, exactly.
I think that's where everybody starts, is this is what works for me, it probably works for you. Then you realize, no, this worked for me. That's why I always try to say, look, I know I was on an edible and I was able to talk to my identity for some time, and that was super weird. But it worked for me. Maybe it's worth exploring for you. We got to go because you are getting on a call right after this.
Literally.
If you have not gotten your tickets to Next Level Live, please do so. We both shared enough Next Level nuggets. Tomorrow, for episode number 1643, we're going to talk about the difference between resting your body and resting your mind. Very hyper-conscious episode this week. As always, we love you. We appreciate you. Grateful for each and every one of you. And at NLU, we don't have fans. We have family. We will talk to you all tomorrow.
Stay hyper-conscious. Next Level Nation.